Hey, what's up, y'all? So today we're going to talk about how to create your own writing template inside of Logic Pro so that you can properly record guitars, bass, MIDI, drums, whatever it is that you want to record. By the end of this, you'll know how to do it yourself, but I'll also include a link to my exact template that we made in this video down in the description below. So if you're too lazy and don't want to make it yourself, you don't have to. So let's go ahead and start a brand new Logic session. So you'll see Logic loading up on here with me. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new empty project. Later, you'll be able to just create a new project from a template, but right now we're going to create a new empty project. Now, I want to emphasize that this video is for people that are trying to write and record guitars inside of Logic using amp sims and things of that sort, but you can use this kind of template for just about anything if you just warp it to your needs. Today, we're going to set it up with my guitar going straight into my Audient ID14 interface, which is a relatively inexpensive interface, and you don't need to use it to use this template. You can use any of the Focusrite interfaces or whatever interface it is that you happen to have. But in this initial window up here, we're going to go ahead and click on Audio, and I'm going to choose Input 1 because that's actually what my guitar is plugged into on my interface. If yours is plugged into Input 2, then obviously change that to Input 2. Man, that sounded condescending. My bad. So once we've created that first track, what we want to do is name it. So I usually name the first guitar track Tracking because I'm going to track guitars with it, right? So once we've got that first track made, what I want to go ahead and do is go ahead and click over here on the far left where it says Audio Effects. If you click on that, you're going to want to navigate to an audio plugin. Now, within Logic, you would go down all the way to audio units and then scroll through all of your different plugins. If you're like me, you probably have way too many. If you're using Neural DSP, then obviously you'd go with Neural DSP. I'm going to go with STL Tones, and we're going to go ahead and open up the Josh Middleton tonality from STL Tones in mono. Now, if you're going to be writing something that is going to be using stereo effects, you're going to want to create a stereo track instead of a mono track, and then add the stereo version of that plugin instead. Because if you don't, all of the stereo like delays and everything that you might use are going to still sound pretty good, but they're not going to like ping pong back and forth on speakers or headphones. And so make sure to create a stereo track if you need a stereo track, otherwise stick to mono. Now what you'll notice is Logic is not playing my guitar out of the speakers or the headphones or anything like that yet. You can see in the meter there that it's receiving the signal, but if you can't hear it yet, it's because of one of two things. One, you might just have your volume turned down on your interface that's going out to your headphones or your speakers. But the more likely culprit is right up here on the track itself where it says I. That is the input monitoring. So if I click on that, which was off at the moment, now it's orange, you can see it's live now. So now I have my guitar signal coming through. Now, depending on your audio interface, at this point, you might need to adjust your input gain to either add or subtract some gain from the signal itself. With this specific interface that I'm using, the Audient ID14, I'm just gonna leave it at 0 gain because that's where it sounds best for this guitar and these pickups that I'm using. Now that we've got this first track created, we're gonna make sure we're clicked on the track, and I'm going to use a shortcut now, and it's Command plus D. So Command D, and we're gonna duplicate that a few times. So we're duplicating not only the track, but if we tap the X key on the keyboard, it brings up our mixer. You'll notice that it also duplicated the plugins on each of the tracks as well, which makes it to where I don't have to re-add the plugin on every single instance. If we press X again to hide the mixer, what I then do is I go through and I pan these guitars left and right, because when I'm recording guitars, I usually double track them and I want them panned left and right. So I'll take one and pan it left and take another one and pan it right. What I'll then do is I'll name them. So guitar left and then guitar right. The other two that I left are for lead guitars. And so I'm going to name them lead guitar 1, and you can just name it lead 1 or whatever you want. Whatever naming scheme works for you. Lead guitar 2. So now we've got 5 different tracks that are capable of recording the guitar DI directly to them, which is super useful because I use this first track that says tracking to actually play and record to, and that stays in just a mono right in the center, so it's not panned left or right. And then when I'm done recording a track, I drag it down to the next track. Now before we get started on that part of it though, I do want to go over something real quick. So if we click on the metronome up here, a lot of people have trouble hearing the stock metronome in Logic. So I'm going to turn it on, it's up in the top right hand corner, and it turns purple when it's on. If I hit play right now, you're going to hear it, but it's going to be a little bit hard to hear. So some people are okay with that. For me, when I'm playing with heavily distorted guitars and drums and bass and everything, that is very hard to hear on top of everything unless I crank it way, way up, which gets very grating on the ears. So if we press X on the keyboard again, and then right here you'll see where it says single, tracks, and all. And Logic defaults it to be at tracks, but if you click on all, you'll notice that the click shows up on here. It's a green track, and it's got Klopfgeist as the instrument because it is a MIDI instrument technically, but it's built into Logic. If we click on that, you'll notice the settings for the metronome itself. And if we hit play again, to me, that's just not a pleasing sound and it's hard to follow. So I'm gonna hit play again. I'm gonna start moving some of these knobs and buttons around. And as you're hearing right now, you're able to change the way the metronome sounds to suit your needs. I have actually programmed a default sound that I like, so I'm going to recall the default sound and let you hear that. That metronome sound that I've just kind of tweaked a little bit to my tastes is really easy to hear above almost any instrument, and it's audibly clear so I can stay on time while I'm playing. And that's the way that I prefer it. That will be included in this template, but if you see on screen right now, just screenshot these settings if you want to. I just cranked the tonality all the way up. Damp is pretty far down. Didn't touch the tunings at all. And I think the level is relatively the same as well. Very, very simple, but that is a huge game changer when it comes to recording guitars especially. You want to be able to hear that click track above it. All right, so we'll click out of there and we'll go back to tracks on the mixer because we don't need to see that or the preview channel. And if we press X to go back, now we've actually got just the edit window again. And we're going to take things a step further because we want to set ourselves up for success when it comes to mixing this later on. So what I do then is I select the 3 tracks that I'm going to use for rhythm guitars and I use another key command. So it's Command, Shift, and D. Brings up this menu here to either create a folder stack or a summing stack. I'm going to create a summing stack because it basically creates a mix bus for them. So if I create that summing stack and then just name it rhythm guitars, and I'm going to do the same for the lead guitars. So select them both, Command, Shift, D, and then summing stack again, and we'll name it lead guitars. The reason for this is that now when I want to mix these 2 different buses, all I have to do is raise or lower this one track. I don't have to go and raise or lower these individual ones. It makes it a lot quicker to simply just raise or lower the level when I'm doing the final mix later, or right now where if I played guitar, this would be too loud to hear the click or the drums again. And so I can just take the rhythm guitars all the way down to like -4, for instance. All right, we're gonna take it a step further. We're gonna collapse both of those. We're gonna select both of those buses and we're gonna press Command Shift D again. And we're gonna create one last summing stack and we're gonna name that just guitars. And this next part is super important because as you just watched me, you're going to forget to do it as well. Press Command S and save your session. So we're gonna save it as Logic Template Builder. You can name it whatever you want, I don't care. This is just what I'm naming it so I know what it is later. So there it is, we have our guitar bus. So when you're mixing, when you look at anybody mixing, they usually have a drum bus, a vocal bus, a bass bus, an effects bus, and a guitar bus. And what we just did is create our guitar bus, but we also created a rhythm guitar bus and a lead guitar bus. The nice thing about this now, if we drop down, we've got our plugins all over all of this. So if I press X again and bring up the mixer, you'll notice the plugins are on all of the playable tracks right here, but they're routed to bus 2 and then bus 3. You can take things a step further and you can actually right click on the little symbols over here and you can tap on guitar and then let's just start putting some random guitars in there. And it just makes it a little bit more visually appealing. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't help with anything unless in your mind it helps with your organization. So you can do that or you can not do that. You can change the colors. You can do it any which way from Sunday. That's all up to you though. So I'll leave that part to you. Now, when it comes to actually recording some guitars, what we want to do is one, make sure we're on our tracking track here. That's just my personal process. You don't have to do that. I prefer to be on the one that's in mono because if we click on the guitar left, for instance, now it's coming out of my left speaker instead of both speakers. So I'm going to click on the mono one because while I'm recording the guitar, I want to hear it out of both speakers. So now that we've got that going, we do need to set our metronome speed. So up here in the top, you can click and drag, or you can double click and you can just type in what tempo you want and press return and it'll put it there. I don't tend to actually record anything at the very beginning of the session. I tend to click around like 3 or even 5. Now up here, you'll see this little gray bar. That is the cycle record. And so if you were to click that on, it would play that same loop over and over and over and over again. And that's a good thing. We want that. I usually record in about 8 measure loops. And so if I click and drag to 11 here, you'll notice if I zoom in a little bit further, you can see that there's quite a bit more bars inside of there. And when I record, I tend to do it that way because it keeps me locked in on that and it'll let me record that same loop over and over and over until I get it right. And as a guitar player, we all know that it's a pain in the neck to record stuff sometimes, especially when you're double tracking and you want to get it clean. And so you might need to do it many, many, many times. I've had some of my take folders of how many takes that I've done be in the like 50, so way double digits, but 50s, 60 and up. And I know that's insane, but hey, sometimes it's what it takes. So now, depending on how you have your computer set up, I have a shortcut set up to where I press Command and Space to actually start recording, but Logic should default for you to just press R to record. I turned that off because I use a different feature in another application, so my default to record is Command plus Space. Or you can just click the record button up here. I like to do it on the keyboard instead. But let's just go ahead and record a simple measure or two of guitar, and then we'll double track it afterwards. And so you saw there, it started to loop it back around again, and I would have been able to record that as many times as I want. And technically I can take those takes and drag them down to the left or right tracks afterwards, but I'll show you why I don't do that. So we're gonna drag that one that we just recorded down to the left guitar, and if I press play, you'll hear it's coming out of the left track there. Metronome is still playing back as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the right guitar, and now you'll hear my guitar coming out of the right speaker or headphone or whatever it is that you're listening to. The reason I do it this way is now when I go to double track this, I'm hearing them in stereo through left and right through my headphones or my speaker, and it just makes it easier for me to know that I'm in time with that other guitar as well as the metronome. So if I press record again, and we're going to double track this. Alright, so now we've recorded a double tracked guitar. I'm going to turn off the metronome, which again is up here in the top right. Go ahead and turn that off, and I'm going to press play, and we're going to listen back to that. And as you heard again, it's just going to keep looping that if I need it to. Now let's say that we want to add a lead guitar to it. Well, thankfully we thought ahead and we created the lead guitar channels down here. And so if I click on lead guitar 1, I'll have my lead guitar tone. Which I don't have any like actual lead guitar tone stuff happening on that. So if we go into the plugin here, let's just go ahead and turn on a delay and a reverb and see. Alright, we definitely don't need that much of it, so let's go ahead and crank down the wet and dry on that. And now that we've got a somewhat of a lead tone, again, we're not tone creating today, we're creating a writing template. But now let's go ahead and record a lead guitar track to that. All right, again, we're not going for perfection here. We're just making a writing template. That was terrible, I know. Trust me. But now that we've got a left and right double tracked guitar track for the rhythms, and we've got one lead track, we can simply hit play and listen back. And now let's say that we need to turn down both of those rhythm guitars, and we need to turn them up, and we don't want to necessarily adjust them granularly because we want to leave them the same. Well, thankfully, again, we made this a guitar bus, and so we can just take the rhythm guitar bus and raise the volume. And likewise, we can lower the lead guitar bus if this were maybe multiple lead tracks. That way we can hide the terrible lead riff that we wrote and nobody has to hear it. So that part in its simplest form is how you set up Logic Pro to write and record and double track guitars very, very simply. So if we go ahead and minimize both of these sections here, let's go ahead and take this a step further, and we're going to create another track for bass. So we'll go to the plus and go to audio, and then we'll keep the same input because if I had a bass in my hand, I would be plugging it into that as well. And let's hit create, and then let's name this bass tracking. And let's go ahead and put a picture of a bass guitar here. So let's do this one. Now, again, we'll click on audio effects over to the left and we'll go down to audio units. And then I'm going to go to Neural DSP because I tend to use Parallax X for my bass tone. We're going to go to mono. You'll see it pops up over here. If we want to open Parallax X, we just click on it. And then from in here, you can load one of your user defaults or anything like that, any of the presets that you like to use. And then you can close that out. Now what I would then do is duplicate it again, Command D, press it twice because I usually don't need more than 3 bass tracks. And let's just do bass 1, bass 2, and then remember from earlier how we created a summing track. So we're going to select all 3 of those and then press Command Shift D and create another summing track. And we're just going to name that bass. And now this is set up for us to record bass as well. And remember, as I told you earlier, if you click on a track and you don't hear any sound out of it, make sure to click the little eye symbol that's up there and then you'll have your guitar coming out of it. Or your bass in this case. That actually sounded kind of cool. So you can hear how much of the mids are in barrel XX there. Okay, so we've got guitars, we've got bass. Now let's go ahead and get some MIDI drums going on here. So we're gonna click the plus up in the top left again, and this time we're gonna click on MIDI right here. And we're going to click on software instrument, and it's already set to EZDrummer 3 because that's what I use the most. But if you don't use EZDrummer and you use other libraries, you're going to navigate down to the bottom where it says AU instruments. And then you'll just look for the ones that you like to use. So if you go through native instruments, which is where a lot of the other libraries like Get Good Drums and Soundblind Drums and a ton of the other ones, they use Kontakt. And so you'd go to whatever version of Kontakt that you have that library in. Or in the case of what I'm doing here, I have TuneTrack, which is EZDrummer 3. There's Tone drums as well in here. I have a ton. I've spent way too much money on plugins. I love EZDrummer 3 because it's really low on the CPU and it's very, very simple to use. So I'm going to load up EZDrummer 3. And then that drops it in there for us. We're going to name that drums, and we're going to change the sign on it to drums as well. Name it drums. I don't know why I didn't name it the first time. And for some reason, Logic likes to do this over here in the sidebar here where it says track and then drums. It shows all of the other MIDI information, which it makes sense because it is a MIDI instrument, but you need to see your sidebar there. So let's go ahead and close that. And now we can see everything again. That's the inspector. And if for some reason your inspector is not showing over here, up in the top left-hand corner, just click this little button here. So I've hit it there and then bring it back. I like to have this open because whatever track or bus that I'm clicked on, I can very easily then see everything on the side and not have to press X to get to my mixer to see those same things. So I love just having the channel strip right there. Now drums, I'm going to also create a bus for. So I'm going to create a summing stack here, and we're going to name it drums as well. Because sometimes I do use multiple kits or other types of like instruments or anything like that, percussion that may fit into the drum like category. And so I always create a bus for it as well. So at this point, we've got guitars, bass, and drums. If you were to do vocals, you could do vocals. I have a feeling a lot of you that are watching this may not do vocals, but if you do, literally just duplicate what you did for guitars and just put vocal plugins on it instead, which most of the time you don't need any vocal plugins at all until you're in the mixing phase. Now we want to create a mix bus for these so I can control the overall volume and maybe throw some mix bus compression and things like that on it. So if we press X again and we just click and drag between those three tracks, you'll see that they all have their output set to stereo output. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on stereo output and go to buses and go to bus 6 or whatever unused bus that there is there. And now we've got auxiliary 6, but I'm going to call that the mix bus. So we've got the mix bus here. Now everything that we just created is all being routed through that mix bus. And what's nice about that is it's going through that before it hits your stereo or your master output. So if you're going to throw any mix bus processing, again, compression, EQ, any types of limiters or anything of that sort, you can throw that on the mix bus and leave your master bus ready for, mastering plugins like maximizers or anything like that, or if you're used to using Ozone, or there's a lot of stuff out there. So if I hit play now, you'll see all of the audio will come through those tracks, but it'll also come through the mix bus. So if I mute the mix bus, no audio. If I mute the guitars, no audio. So if I just mute the guitar bus itself, all of the guitars are now muted. And so I would only be hearing bass and drums if there were any on there. This makes it, again, super helpful for, soloing something that you need to listen to really quickly or soloing an entire section. So that way you can get to whatever problem it is that's happening to you. I do tend to leave all of these little accordions opened up, especially for the guitars, because I do like to see everything as I'm recording. Now, if some of this stuff is a little bit too small for you, you can pinch to zoom if you're on the trackpad, but up here in the top right-hand corner, you do have the controls to make things a lot larger or a lot smaller. You can see the waveform start to disappear if you do that. And if for some reason these are even too small for you to see when you blow them up like that, if you click on this one right here next to where it says drag, you'll be able to actually zoom those way in. So if you're looking for something that's very minute, a very minute change in the DI for editing purposes, for instance, you can click on that. If you click and hold, you can actually blow that up way, way too much, and this might be useful for something that was a really, really quiet signal, or you can drag it back down. I tend to leave it right about there, and this is something I would use a lot when I'm editing live drums or editing guitar or bass or vocals. Not so much, obviously, for MIDI drums because there's not really much need to edit those. You just drag the MIDI notes where you need to have them. So that's where we're at for today. And let me know if this is helpful because I can then post a mix walkthrough on the next video where we take the same exact session and we add some basic mixing plugins from within Logic Pro itself. And we do just a really basic mix and master so that way you can post something to social media or send a demo to a friend, for instance. But anything else you guys might want to know about how I use Logic Pro to write and record music and collaborate with others, let me know down in the comments below, because I'd be more than happy to show you guys how I do that. These videos are fun to make, and I hope that this helps somebody out there. So until next time, peace and love, and I'll talk to you all soon.